Welcome back, my Urban X's. I'm your host Tereza, and get your mask, hard hat, flashlight, and steel toes ready because today's Bumblebee video is the top 10 scary abandoned places you should never visit. As a huge fan of urban exploration myself, I want to get any locations you might have heard of out of the way. Naturally, for my pros, you may know most, if not all of these, from your own bucket list, like the Island of the Dolls in Mexico. Our channel watchers may know this island from this video that Taylor did on the top 10 islands that can't be explained. Even outside of our videos, this island swept social media attention in the mid-2010s on Twitter after Ghost Adventures and a few other adventurers visited. Just outside of Mexico City, sandwiched in the center of a canal between two populated shores, sits a small artificial island of worn-out, dusty, and seemingly endless baby dolls. The story goes that Julian Santa Barrera found the body of a young girl floating in the canal by his island. Feeling pain and guilt for the girl, Julian one day has a doll wash up on the island. From that moment, he covers the island in dolls to ward off any evil spirits trying to take her form. This island became abandoned in 2001 when Julian himself is found floating, reportedly in the same spot as the girl who had been found decades before. Nobody knew what life for Julian was fully like on the island and the spirits he may have battled, except the inheritor of the island, his nephew. Daring souls can hire their own boat and try to convince the driver to pay a visit to the island and view it along with the decaying house and dangling dolls safely from the water. Though the most thorough tour I've personally seen of this island is actually the Ghost Adventures episode. If you aren't a fan of ghost hunters but you are a fan of history, I actually recommend this show for its historical sites and information. Another more common name on this list is the Paris catacombs. If you were also traumatized by the horror movie As Above, So Below, then welcome to the party. There's some new information developing about the catacombs that I'll get to in a second, which is the reason I actually chose to talk about them. For those who aren't sure, the catacombs are a hidden tunnel system beneath the streets of Paris, France. The first to be built was in 1786 in the district of Les Halles. Catacombs are underground cemeteries or ossuaries, and this one was built well into the last of the 18th century and used by the French resistance as an HQ during the Second World War. Skeletons were often disassembled so that specific walls were skulls, others were femurs, others were tibias, so on and so forth. Sometimes the bones are stacked to create artistic visuals or build walls and arches and columns. They got gorgeous with it. The catacomb tunnel system is a literal labyrinth, which is why A, we don't actually know how deep or far they go, and B, they are seriously close to the public. Barricades, gates over gates, the whole ordeal. Hundreds of people have been known to have gone missing down there, and many other missing people are believed to have vanished there, but we don't have the connective proof. Now, the reason I chose this. Urban explorers have started using a feature on the iPhone 12 Pro to map catacombs virtually. These 3D rendered maps take recordings of the surroundings and rebuild them digitally, and for the first time in history, these brave explorers go further and document deeper. We are now getting the only map of the catacombs, and it's a 3D rendered one that shows texture, even graffiti. I wonder if this will help us find lost explorers, or we'll end up with more. And while we're here in France, let's check out Château de Montségur. This French countryside castle has earned a couple unpleasant yet catchy nicknames in its bloody history. To start, the earliest signs of human settlement in the area date back to the Stone Age. Evidence of Roman occupation such as Roman currency and tools have been found in and around the site. But around 1204, Raymond de Periel, one of two of the lords of Montségur, decided to rebuild the castle that had been in ruins for 40 years. Refortified, the castle became the center of Cathar activities, estimated to have housed 500 people. Hughes the Archis spent 7 months trying to siege this cliff-edge castle after some of his men that represented the Inquisition were killed by its inhabitants, but many fell to their death trying to get there. This castle earned the title Citadel in the Sky for how dangerous and precarious any pathway was to it. After 7 months, Hughes finally decided to send a small group of particularly agile soldiers up the cliff face. This is how they finally capture the castle. The fate of those who lived inside? Sunday in March of 1244, more than 200 men and women were led down to a bonfire where they steadfastly refused to renounce their faiths and thus were burnt alive in what's now the Field of the Burn. Château de Montségur is one of the many Cathar castles in the hill that remains, but the most dangerous to visit due to the cliff's location. The endless stories that have circulated around it are those of screams of the people being burnt alive echoing off the stone walls. Now in Philly, it's the Eastern State Penitentiary. What penitentiary doesn't have a grisly history, honestly? Well, Eastern State is a winner in the ways of inmate cruelty. Built in 1829, it was one of the first penitentiaries ever built, and it was once the world's most expensive prison, combining impressive design and strict discipline to inspire regret and reform in the hearts of convicts. Yeah, it immediately took solitary confinement to new levels. Prisoners lived alone, exercised alone, and ate alone. When an inmate left his cell, a guard would cover their head with a hood so he couldn't see or be seen. Cell doors weren't even bars, so you couldn't even wave to the inmate across the hall. No contact. And psychologically, this is devastating, especially as many criminals have mental illnesses and disorders pre-existingly. Accordingly, thousands of inmates took their lives in the Eastern State Pen. I mean, not Al Capone, he bribed staff so much that his prison cell looked luxurious AF. But in 1913, this solitary system was abandoned, not even for a good reason, rather the opposite, overcrowding. And I didn't say punishment got less severe, however. Punishments now included chaining an inmate's tongue to his wrists, being denied clothes or a lavatory, even blackout treatments. The prison doors were closed in 1971 after thousands of killings, riots, taking of own lives, and more. Since the site has been known for ghostly figures, strange 911 calls coming inside without explanation, and now former inmates speak of the horrendous treatments themselves, but also of spirits they believe they even encountered inside those big metal doors before they slammed shut for the final time. It's abandoned, but not the Los Feliz Familia side. So this house is in the process of renovations once again. But as usual, nobody moves in, and the home continues to trade between the hands of the wealthy due to endless coding errors, making it not worth the investment. At least not to the rich, but the property is. Los Feliz is one of LA's coolest and most livable luxury neighborhoods, even if it does represent the grim past of the Souden house, which is rumored to be the site of Black Delilah's butchering, the Sharon Tate home, and of course, this property. Dr. Harold Perelson and his family lived here until the night of December 6, 1959. Harold takes a hammer to his sleeping wife and his eldest daughter, whose scream wakes the 3 children of the house in time for them to flee. Harold then drinks a vat of acid. It's believed he snapped when, as a successful doctor who had invented a new type of syringe, he got screwed out of the rights for it. He left a passage of Dante's Divine Comedy open on the bedside table as a supposed note before taking action. 2 years it sat empty before the ownership juggle began. First the Enriquez, who used it as a storage unit, and then their son did the same before selling it to a couple in 2016. They started the reno, but ever since, every owner who's attempted to right the house just seems incapable of it and are ran out by spirits. Don't bother trying to visit no matter how abandoned. The community is gated, the house heavily monitored, and it's not actually structurally sound. Previous owners have implied demonic activity, but seeing as the whole neighborhood is a hotbed for Hollywood violence, maybe it's just the whole block. Speaking of this neighborhood and its gruesome past, next is the Spawn Ranch, and this location has an IMDb page that's actually impressive. Movies, TVs, cults, the whole enchilada. In 1970 Esquire magazine article, Spawn Ranch was described to not be so much of a ranch as it was the old western movie set it once was. The row of empty buildings extending along the dirt road towards Spawn's shack hold decaying structures, faded signs marking them as saloons, a barbershop, a cafe, a jail, and a carriage house. They were all constructed many years ago as a Hollywood setting for a western. Sadie Atkins discovered the ranch in 1967, and the squatter cult subtly and slowly moved their way in. The owner, George Spawn, was blind and elderly and not going out often. He received a lot of help from the woman of the cult and built a friendship with the leader, Manson, especially Squeaky Forms. The first few years of the commune were tranquil, supporting the family's mysticism and freedom. They would play act roles, cowboys one day, pirates the next. But the ranch's isolation fostered deep paranoia. There were no books or clocks or calendars. They became increasingly reliant on each other, which enabled their eventual feelings of paranoia and fear. In 1969, Manson's drug running went wrong, and he thinks he missed the member of the Black Panthers. Terrified now of the Black Panthers coming for him, he had his former convict buddies start hanging around more, as well as biker gang members. More criminals that came to camp, the more police presence increased on the ranch, leading to further radicalization amongst the paranoia and substance abuse. This escalation continues over the summer and culminates with the devastating Tate LaBianca killings. Now the Spawn Ranch is nothing but a shell. Damage and debris remain from the final police raid in 1969, and Manson prosecutor Vincent Bogololsi, in his 1974 book Helter Skelter, describes the remoteness of the ranch, which is said to have been burnt down in a Southern California wildfire in September of 1970. Back to jail we go for Old Montana State Prison. This prison gets its ghastly history for the Jerry's Riot, which is also the coined name for the only comprehensive non-fiction account of Montana's infamous 1959 prison riot. This is also considered one of the worst prisons in history. Within a month of the prison opening its doors, the building was overcrowded and remained this way for years, reaching its peak in 1885 when 120 inmates were incarcerated in the institution that only had 28 cells. Although the completion of the cell block meant a roof over prisoners' heads, the amenities in the facility were sparse. No heating or ventilation, and the wood stove smoke actually mixed with the bucketed human waste and unwashed body smell to make the environment just rank. Jerry's Riot was caused when a career criminal, Jerry Miles, came toe-to-toe with the new warden, Floyd Powell, who was determined to remove the prison's corrupt control of its own prisoners. prisoners. Jerry carefully planned the riot and his escape. All told, the prison was under inmate control for 36 hours, drawing international media attention until the National Guard troops stormed the prison. Jerry and accomplice Lee Smart ended the riot by taking their own lives. The facility was retired in September of 1979, and the inmates were moved to the current prison. While this abandoned site was turned into a museum, it was not restored, and most of the remains are closed to the public. The derelict environment shows the torment of the prisoners and even markers of the riots that occurred here. Over in India, we can investigate Gar Kundar. This temple is fascinating and unlike others. For one, there's zero vandalism and no encroachment. It's seemingly squeaky clean despite no caretaker, devoid of bats and snakes, which is practically unnatural. There's no information about who built this fort, and it's said that it's about 1500 to 2000 years old. According to the local goat hoarders, who they themselves never venture near or in the fort, it is super haunted. Bardic tradition is of the opinion anyone who attempts to spend the night within it is never seen again. And this is because of a legend of warring Kangars and Bundelas. A marriage happens between two members of their nations, and the Bundelas use it as an opportunity to attack the Kangars. This massacre is said to have happened in the temple and is the marker of the spirits there. Whatever the truth, the reality is that Kundar was abandoned way back in 1517. It's stayed that way since. It's believed that there's treasure in this fort, and many people have lost their lives in the search for it. The 2-floor basement has been closed, and many believe that the treasure is hidden within it. But entering is absolutely not worth it. Locals nearby say that a long time ago a different marriage took place in a village, and when guests came to visit the fort here, they chose to roam in the still open basement. Those 50 to 60 people vanished and haven't ever been found, as goes for any person said to enter the temple since. Thus the basement was sealed. But it is currently under consideration to be restored. It may have not been a title to prison, but it essentially was. Penhurst State School. Suffer the Little Children was a groundbreaking 1968 NBC expose on the Penhurst State School, documented and hosted by Bill Baldini. During 8 decades of continuous operation, Penhurst evolved from a model facility, operating its own power plant, policing its own grounds, producing its own food, into the subject of a huge public scandal and controversy before the federal courts ordered it closed and the remaining residents moved elsewhere. This is because the state put pressure on Penhurst to not just service the disabled, but also immigrants and criminals and orphans who couldn't be housed elsewhere. It was overcrowded with only a few years, had next to no budget. The food produced was no longer enough, neither was the staff. Doctors began to abuse their patients. Patients abused patients. Violence was rampant, and the building was quite literally crumbling around them. The NBC document blows a scandal right open. Horrific footage shows people living in their own feces, and a lot much worse. At its peak, there was more than 3,500 people in the custodial care at Penhurst, which was 900 more people than it was built to hold. By 1980, the overcrowding, lack of funds, inadequate staffing, and decades of abuse and neglect accusations caught up with the operation, and in 1987, Penhurst closed its doors. Today, the place is in the hands of private owners and at the center of controversy for its exploitation as a haunted attraction. This mostly abandoned site is subject to endless ghost stories dedicated to those who perished in their time there. The building's motto, they lived here, they died here, they're still here. Don't visit this site, please. And now, a name worth shivering over, Russia's City of the Dead. Outside of the remote and mountainous Russian village Dargvas lies the medieval township dubbed the City of the Dead. Comprising of 99 remarkably conserved medieval crypts, they all have tall curved roofs and a single window each. Inside these, the remains of more than 10,000 people lie with their clothes and belongings. Some are so well preserved the flesh remains on the bone. While much mystery surrounds this graveyard, including the date of its construction and the age of the bodies, one thing for sure is that the locals believe that anyone who dares to enter won't return alive. One theory for the community of corpses is that when the territory was scarce during the 13th century Mongol-Tatar invasion, locals living in this area began to create similarly structured above-ground crypts to conserve space. Another theory suggests that the City of the Dead was created following the Indo-Iranian tradition by migrants who settled in southern Russia and buried their dead above ground to respect the land. But it could also incorporate the plague epidemic in the 17th and 18th century, as evidence shows residents quarantined themselves in crypts and provided food and water through the sole windows as they waited for their death to approach. Some bodies inside the crypts were also buried in wooden coffins that resembled boats, and one corpse was even discovered to have an oar next to it. With no navigatable rivers nearby, some historians think ancient residents believed that one must cross a river to reach heaven. And while it is available to visit, very few do. Historian Lyudmila Gabavea believes that anyone visiting the City of the Dead leaves with something more. The people who come here in awe of the beauty of this place achieve peace with the eternal fear of death. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed an explorative trek of some historical locations. Be sure to like and subscribe to see more, and comment down below on where you'd explore if you were given the chance and knew it was safe.